We are continuing this week with the story of Joseph from the book of Genesis. And you'll remember that when we left off last week, Joseph was in prison, unjustly imprisoned for an accusation that wasn't true. So that's where we are. And I'm going to be reading from chapters 40 and 41, but I'm not going to read all the verses. This is sort of a shortened version. And I'm actually reading from a different translation of the Bible. This is from the Common English Bible, which I think is a little bit easier to understand in stories like this. So, listen to this reading from Genesis, chapters 40 and 41, and listen for what God is saying to you through these words, through the Holy Spirit. Sometime later, both the wine steward and the baker for Egypt's king offended their master, the king of Egypt. Pharaoh was angry with his two officers, and he put them under arrest with the commander of the royal guard in the same jail where Joseph was imprisoned. The commander of the royal guard assigned Joseph to assist them. After they had been under arrest for some time, both of them, the wine steward and the baker for Egypt's king, who were imprisoned in the jail, had dreams one night. And each man's dream had its own meaning. When Joseph met them in the morning, he saw that they were upset. He asked the officers of Pharaoh, "Why do you look so distressed today?" They answered, "We've both had dreams, but there's no one to interpret them." Joseph said to them, "Don't interpretations belong to God? Describe your dreams to me." The chief wine steward described his dream to Joseph, and Joseph said to him, "This is the dream's interpretation. After 3 days, Pharaoh will give you an audience and return you to your position. You will put Pharaoh's cup in his hand just the way things were before when you were his wine steward. But please remember me when you're doing well, and be loyal to me. Put in a good word for me to Pharaoh, so he sets me free from this prison. I was stolen from the land of the Hebrews, and here too I've done nothing to be thrown into this dungeon." When the chief baker saw that the interpretation was favorable, he said to Joseph, "It was the same for me," and he described his dream. Joseph responded, "This is the dream's interpretation. After 3 days, Pharaoh will give you an audience and will hang you from a tree where the birds will peck your flesh from you." The 3rd day was Pharaoh's birthday, and he gave a party for all of his servants. Before all of his servants, he gave an audience to the chief wine steward and the chief baker. He returned the chief wine steward to his position, and he placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand. But the chief baker he hanged, just as Joseph had said would happen when he interpreted their dreams for them. But the chief wine steward didn't remember Joseph. He forgot all about him. Part 2. 2 years later, Pharaoh dreamed that he was standing near the Nile. In front of him, 7 healthy-looking fattened cows climbed up out of the Nile and grazed on the reeds. Just then, 7 other cows, terrible-looking and scrawny, climbed up out of the Nile after them and stood beside them on the bank of the Nile. The terrible-looking scrawny cows devoured the 7 healthy-looking fattened cows. Then Pharaoh woke up. He went back to sleep and had a second dream in which 7 ears of grain, full and healthy, grew on a single stalk. Just then, 7 ears of grain, scrawny and scorched by the east wind, sprouted after them. And the scrawny ears swallowed up the full and well-formed ears. Then Pharaoh woke up and realized it was a dream. In the morning, he was disturbed and summoned all of Egypt's religious experts and all of its advisors. Pharaoh described his dreams to them, but they couldn't interpret them for Pharaoh. Then Pharaoh sent for Joseph, and he was hurriedly brought out of the dungeon. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, I had a dream, and there is no one who can interpret it. I have heard it said of you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it. Joseph answered Pharaoh, It is not I. God will give Pharaoh a favorable answer. Then Pharaoh told him his dreams. Joseph said to Pharaoh, Pharaoh has actually had one dream. God has announced to Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 healthy cows are 7 years, and the 7 healthy ears of grain are 7 years. It's actually one dream. The 7 thin and frail cows climbing up after them are 7 years. The 7 thin ears of grain scorched by the east wind are 7 years of famine. It's just as I told Pharaoh. God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do. 7 years of great abundance are now coming throughout the entire land of Egypt. After them, 7 years of famine will appear, and all of the abundance in the land of Egypt will be forgotten. The famine will devastate the land. The dream occurred to Pharaoh twice because God has determined to do it, and God will make it happen soon. Now, Joseph continued, Pharaoh should find an intelligent, wise man and give him authority over the land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh should appoint administrators over the land and take 1/5 of all the produce of the land of Egypt during the 7 years of abundance. During the good years that are coming, they should collect all such food and store the grain under Pharaoh's control, protecting the food in the cities. This food will be reserved for the 7 years of famine to follow in the land of Egypt, so that the land won't be ravaged by the famine. This advice seemed wise to Pharaoh and all his servants, and Pharaoh said to his servants, Can we find a man with more God-given gifts than this one? Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, Since God has made all this known to you, no one is as intelligent and wise as you are. You will be in charge of my kingdom, and all my people will obey your command. Only as the enthroned king will I be greater than you. Pharaoh said to Joseph, Know this, I've given you authority over the entire land of Egypt. Pharaoh took his signet ring from his hand and put it on Joseph's hand. He dressed him in linen clothes, and he put a gold necklace around his neck. So Pharaoh installed him over the entire land of Egypt. Pharaoh said to Joseph, I am Pharaoh. No one will do anything or go anywhere in all the land of Egypt without your permission. Then Joseph assumed control of the land of Egypt. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
If tomorrow all the things were gone I'd worked for all my life,
and I had to start again with just my children and my wife,
I thank my lucky stars to be living here today.
'cause the flag still stands for freedom, and they can't take that away. And I'm proud to be an American, where at least I know I'm free. And I won't forget the men who died to give the right to me. And I'd gladly stand up next to you and defend her still today. 'Cause there ain't no doubt I love this land. God bless the USA. across the plains of Texas, from sea to shining sea, from Detroit down to Houston, and New York to LA. Well, there's pride in every American heart, and it's time to stand and say, America, America, God shed his grace on thee, and crown thy good with brotherhood, from sea to shining sea. And I'm proud to be an American, where at least I know I'm free. And I won't forget the men who died, who gave that right to me. And I'd gladly stand up next to you and defend her still today.
'Cause there ain't no doubt I love this land.
I love this land. God bless the USA.
Thanks, you guys. Way back in my college psychology days, we spent quite a bit of time learning about Sigmund Freud, starting with his book called The Interpretation of Dreams. Freud believed that dreams are filled with subconscious needs, and they're never really what is most obvious. You dream about a friend, and that friend really represents someone else in your life. Dreams are your subconscious thoughts bubbling up when the ego is asleep. Now, some biological scientists argue that this is ridiculous. One writer said they are nothing more than the involuntary activation of the brain during sleep. Why the brain self-activates just so, we don't know, nor can we be sure about any purpose of such neurological functions, if there are any. But perhaps the most ancient way to interpret dreams is to understand them as means of divine communication. Early desert monks who lived in mostly isolated places and spent their lives in mystic prayer were suspicious of their own dreams, believing they could never be worthy of a visit like that from God. But still, sometimes dreams seem like more than just random brain activity. And such was the case in today's reading. You'll remember a few weeks ago, Joseph told his brothers about some dreams he had, both of which they all believed were messages from God, saying that their little brother Joseph would rule over them someday. Sheaves of grain were bowing down, and stars in the sky were bowing down. In today's readings, Joseph himself isn't the dreamer, he's the interpreter of dreams. He insists, though, that the interpretations aren't his own, but given by God. So while he's in prison, he interprets the dreams of his fellow prisoners. A good dream by the wine steward and a very bad dream by the baker. And sure enough, within days, the words he spoke became reality. The wine steward is taken out of prison and restored to his job in the royal house, and the baker is executed, and his body is literally fed to the birds. A couple years after that, even though that lucky wine steward had said he would remember Joseph and help him out, Joseph was still in prison. But Pharaoh himself had some dreams, and no matter who he asked, no one could tell him what they meant. Finally, someone told him about this young Hebrew slave down at the prison, and he calls him up and tells him about his dreams. Again, Joseph says the interpretations aren't from me, they're from God. And then he explains that both of Pharaoh's dreams are the same and that they're very important to pay attention to. There's about to be a huge famine. It's going to last a long time. And these dreams are a message that you need to get ready for it. And then he says this to Pharaoh. Now, Pharaoh should find an intelligent, wise man and give him authority over the land of Egypt. You'll remember last year we talked about how humble Joseph had become. Looks like maybe he lost a little bit of that, and he's back to these old tricks that he has of self-promotion, like he did when he was at home, and the king falls for it. The story says, this advice seemed wise to Pharaoh and all his servants, and Pharaoh said to his servants, can we find a man with more God-given gifts than this one? And then Pharaoh said to Joseph, says, God has made all this known to you. No one is as intelligent and wise as you are. You'll be in charge of my kingdom. All my people will obey you. Only as the enthroned king will I be greater than you. So we've seen another twist of fate. Joseph's life, like his attitude, is a roller coaster. He's an arrogant young kid sitting on a pedestal at home with his father, and then he's literally stripped and thrown into a pit and sold into slavery. He's elevated as a slave and then tricked and thrown into prison. And now he's back on top with a new beautiful robe, right? A new coat of many colors, we can say, more powerful than he's ever been. Life can be like that sometimes. Just when we think things are swimming along, we've got it all under control, we're hit by a wave beyond our control. And after living in a low state for a while, somehow we're lifted up again. Joseph doesn't experience this elevation because he's righteous or because he's holier than anyone else. He didn't have to work to become his father's favorite, and all he did for Pharaoh was to speak words that he says God has given him. He wasn't even that likable when you think about it. But he was loved and blessed by God. What was it in him that God loved so much? Why was he the chosen one for the dreams? Pastor James Bryan Smith tells this story. When he was a young boy, 12th century church leader Bernard of Clairvaux fell asleep outside a church while waiting to go in for Christmas Eve service. In his sleep, he had a dream in which he saw very clearly and distinctly how the Son of God, having espoused human nature, became a little child in his mother's womb. In that act, he came to see how God's heavenly majesty was mingled with sweet humility. This vision so filled young Bernard's heart with comfort and jubilation that throughout his life he kept a vivid memory of it. What was it that filled his heart with joy? It was nothing other than the fact that God chose to be with us, Emmanuel. Out of love, Jesus was conceived, and out of love, he chose to die. There is something in us that God finds lovable. It's certainly not our sanctity, nor is it our fidelity. When I look at my own baseness, my own incredible ability to sin at a moment's notice, I wonder what God sees in me. Friends, God can see something in each one of you as well. It doesn't matter where you've come from. It doesn't matter what fears or doubts you have. It doesn't matter how cute you are or what you're wearing. Always, 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 God is with you. Just as God was with Joseph throughout the roller coaster of his life. God will forever see you with love. Love to be conceived and born, enough love to walk through our neighborhood, enough love to suffer and die for us. May your dreams guide you in the direction of peace and hope, keeping in your mind and heart the grace you are given each day. Amen.